Today, I'm looking at 2025. You're going to hear about miracles, courage, storytelling, identity, and creativity at so many levels. And be sure to stay to the end. I have something of value waiting for you. I never begin my year with resolutions. I begin my year with hope. The poet Seamus Heaney wrote, "Believe that a further shore is reachable from here. Believe in miracles." My grandparents believed in miracles back when miracles were an accepted part of life. They believed that the miracle of leaving home to go to the promise of America would really happen, and it did. They believed that my grandfather's back, broken in a fall, would heal perfectly, allowing him to return to his work as a carpenter, and it did. They believed that their youngest son, my uncle, would not be killed in the war, and he returned safely. They believed that their eldest daughter, my mother, would walk again after a hideous accident, and she did. For them, miracles were really real. They said it was the hand of God, but it was also an indomitable spirit of who they were that gave them the energy to make the decisions they needed to make in order to move forward. It was also the curiosity to find other possibilities for the next step in the path. I think it was also the intelligence to choose the actions that led to the path toward their dreams. Keep in mind, as teenagers, they each left parents and siblings to board a ship and land in a totally new city, speaking a new language, living with new customs. Where did they get the necessary social support in the midst of all this? My guess is that the first support came from their belief in God's hand in their lives. They didn't feel alone, but it also came from new neighbors who had the same fears and concerns as they. That support existed throughout their lives. I know this because I remember watching my grandfather walk down the street to a bench where he and a few neighbors came every day to share the stories of their day. My grandparents saw their lives as being full of miracles, and I like the word. I believe in miracles too. As I recalled these memories, I saw again the qualities that highly resilient people possess as they decide to move on. They knew who they were, my grandparents. They decided to move on. They were curious to learn that gave them a reservoir of knowledge from which to draw when needed. And they had social support that gave them comfort in adversity to take the next step and move on. As Seamus Heaney says, believe that a further shore is reachable from here. Believe in miracles. My show today is about the further shore that Heaney writes about and how we prepare ourselves for the journey to that shore. I'm going to begin with what it is that sparks a response as we face the new year. Ambiguity. Sir Johnny Ive was the head designer at Apple for many years, creating some of the most iconic forms that we use in our daily lives. He said, "You somehow have to make friends with uncertainty." Uncertainty is what unhinges us. Uncertainty is what holds us back from daring the norm, from being creative, from the innovation that could change our life. Ed Hoffman, the former CKO of NASA, was on the show talking about his book, Smart Mission. He talked about the uncertainty of creating a smart mission. The uncertainty comes from the human relationships and how an environment made up of human beings is so complex and ambiguous that it can't even be measured. A team at NASA is not the same as a team in another organization, and not just because NASA is about science. It's the context that is different. And it means that we have to come together and create our own context and our own environment, one that respects the person who says what we don't want to hear. For example, the complete show is number 46, The Smart Mission, with both Ed Hoffman and the late Larry Prussack. The Smart Mission, NASA's Lessons for Managing Knowledge, People, and Projects, is also a book available on Amazon. The link will be posted on the show notes on YouTube. For now, I asked Ed to give us a comment for 2025, and here's what he said.
Happy holidays. This is wishes for a great 2025. What's the best advice I ever got? It's a tough one. I've received a lot of advice in my life. One of the things I always remembered, there was a wonderful leader years ago at NASA that I worked with. And he was known for, being one of the best project leaders. He was known as a person who would get things done. He was also known as being incredibly innovative. And sometimes that innovation would get him in trouble. And so sometimes it'd be at an agency headquarters level. Sometimes it'd be back in the field, depending on how things went. And in one particular decision, I won't go into, but he did something that was really incredibly creatively outrageous. And it demonstrated his commitment to looking at different opportunities, being curious, taking different chances, looking at the whole field, if you will. And I remember asking him, I said, how do you do these? How do you take these kinds of chances? And what he told me is, Ed, you're a smart guy, but you got to remember that when problems come up, you can't keep doing the same things over and over again. And the system, the larger system, the organization will try to keep you on the same status quo path. But also remember that the system is chicken, and it relies on people to stay engaged, to take chances, to be provocative, and not to worry about the outcomes. He said his success has really come from taking chances. So what I would say to you, my wishes is to stay curious, stay engaged, stay passionate, look at the great opportunities. When there's a problem, usually there's a solution. With a solution, there's a way to make things better. And remember that the system is chicken. It's up to us to keep energizing it. Have a wonderful 2025.
Thank you, Ed. I was struck by that phrase, the system is chicken. Even when things are ambiguous, it's up to us to take action. For example, suppose you have a team member who suffered a severe accident and will be out for an unspecified time period. He is the only member of the team who knows how to do a certain process. Should you hire a new person who can learn the system and hope they can get up to speed quickly enough? Or should you hire a consultant who is an expert in the system and run the risk of overreaching your budget? It's unclear which is best. Should you choose on the basis of short-term gain, hire a new person and worry about what to do when your staff member is well again and can return to work? Or should you risk your budget to keep productivity high and the job open for your injured staff member? The system is likely to say, hire someone to do the job. Which action will you choose? Let's see what others say. If we are to take action, I'd like to begin with one of the most important contributors to resilience, the confidence that comes from a clear sense of who you are. That clarity roots you when the winds of ambiguity push at you. Dr. Tom Garcia has been in the healing arts for over 30 years. After many years as a practicing chiropractor, today he is a shaman and wisdom keeper, applying his healing methods on deep healing in body, mind, and spirit. He is a coach, writer, teacher, mentor, and guide. He joined me on show number 77, Boundaries and Identity. When I asked for his words for you as you entered 2025, his emphasis is on being your authentic self that only begins vertically.
I think it's a question that a lot of people have. How can I be my authentic self in a world that doesn't accept who I am? Well, the first thing is we have to accept who we are. And to be authentically who we are is to be deeply connected to the source of who we are within ourselves. And it takes time, it's a practice. We must deepen and strengthen our connection to that which created us. It's a vertical connection, being deeply grounded, connected to the heavens, to the sky, with your feet firmly planted on the earth. Developing, cultivating that connection stabilizes the horizontal plane. So when we're connected vertically, the horizontal plane that we live in, where the ego thrives and has a place, becomes stabilized. But without that, we live in an inherently unstable world. So being who you are is why you're here. And to discover what that means for you. And when you accept you, the world will accept you without question. The only doubt is self-doubt. And so that's what must be dispelled or banished. Think about it and take the time every day to cultivate your connection with your divine self. Make it a morning practice. Aho.
I appreciated how he shared why beginning vertically provides the anchor, as Tom says, the stability, for the horizontal that we bring into the world. Did you notice that too? That vertical aspect of you is about knowing your values as well as your strengths. You know, consultants and coaches often begin with strengths, and they are essential. But values are what build a strong pillar that holds you up. Sometimes we have to make a decision that involves factors that push us in different directions that can't be brought together, no matter how hard and long we work. Parents often find themselves in such situations. Should you go to work or stay home to care for a sick child? That one may sound easy, but how about defending your staff when it means that you will take the brunt of the reactions from management? In a reduction in force exercise, I found that I had to decide between pleasing the boss by laying off a woman with qualifications or keeping my staff productive by keeping the necessary staff, including her. I chose the latter. And my division returned to high productivity within a week of the layoffs, when the rest of the organization lost 30% productivity. I chose justice instead of expediency. About 10 years ago, I studied with Bo Eason as I worked to prepare for the next phase of my career. I thought I was learning how to speak from the stage, but what I learned was much deeper. I rediscovered the power of story to explore who I am. Bo said, when you start to develop your own voice and your own story, and you start to find your way and where your strengths and weaknesses are, boy, you're pretty much unstoppable, because you can't get knocked off who you are anymore. In my research, I saw that highly resilient people really know who they are. When the unexpected happens, they are confident they will not be overturned or overwhelmed or overcome, because who they are is so deeply understood that it can stand firm. It's one of the most important traits that assure a person can be resilient in tough times. As Bo says, you're unstoppable. When I followed his suggestion to find the stories where I was unsure, where I was afraid, where I was down, I discovered a strength in myself. After all, I was no longer in that story. I was telling the story. So I had made it through. And that alone told me that I was stronger than I might have thought. My stories acted like a viewfinder, showing me a dimension about myself. In the same vein, when tellers share their stories, they share a little piece of themselves to their listeners. I sometimes think that is why people are reluctant sometimes to tell a personal story. You know, if you tell an authentic personal story, you can't hide yourself. We often think that we will appear vulnerable because the story will reveal that we were in a challenging moment. But what it really shows is the strength you exhibited to weather it. A masterful story worker is Artem Mushin-Makedonskiy, founder of Academy Historia, a company where he helps people convey meaning, inspire, and stay human with the power of real-life stories. Artem runs a virtual international conference on storytelling to a large audience of more than 500 year after year. And he does this from his home just outside Moscow. This year, I spoke at his conference on the topic story, reality, and quantum physics. It was difficult to convey the subtle points I wanted to make. And it was the first time I had ever given this presentation. Anyone who speaks at conferences knows the first time it comes out of the box, so to speak, you aren't really sure if everything is perfectly clear, that it will connect with the audience and fully accomplish what you hoped for. You also aren't sure if all the technology will work seamlessly. If the audience is right and if the problem arises, that help will be there. I can recall conferences where I was promised one thing, like being able to see my slides as I presented, and in the end, that one thing was changed to something else. I could see nothing that the audience was viewing. My experience with Artem's conference, which I told him afterward, was one of the best conference experiences I have ever had as a speaker. And I've spoken at many conferences, including that one that was so difficult. I sensed there was a story there about the magic of how this conference was run. I invited him to Unlocked to talk about how he created such a positive experience. He came and spoke on successful virtual conferences, show number 121. If you want to have a successful virtual conference, listen to this show. You will learn Artem's secret, and it doesn't begin with the audience. And that's a surprise. When I asked him if he would like to talk to you about 2025, he immediately responded. He has always concerned himself with using stories as a bridge across cultures, so much so that he created the story game. And toward the end of the video, he will talk about the game. The link to the game, by the way, will be posted in the comments section on YouTube and Spotify.
To strengthen the connection between people in the world with growing polarization, we need to come by the campfire more often and exchange stories. I know it sounds quite obvious and you've probably heard it before, that stories create connections, but the thing is, the stories we tell do not always create connections because we tend to tell the stories that are just moments of fun with experience from our lives, just like stand-up comedy, or stories that are not fun at all, like painting somebody in the darker colors, because our brain is an expert in terms of noticing the moments when somebody falls below expectations. What I would offer for you in the 2025 is to find, tell, and maybe help others tell stories with a prompt like this one. Remember a time when you suddenly discovered how exactly your work has benefited somebody else, and you thought to yourself, man, if I could see those changes every day, I would really work for free. What happened? What have you discovered? These kinds of questions pose a different challenge to our brain. They help us see and retell the stories that highlight how we benefit others. And even if this story is told by somebody who we feel is opposing to us, we suddenly discover that there is a human being next to us because he is affecting somebody else in a good way. So my offer for you is to tell the right stories in the upcoming year. And maybe you will help the Stories Without Borders game useful in that sense, because it has a lot of prompts that help remember and tell the right stories, the light stories. Happy New Year, and may your stories create connections.
Have you ever had a team that seemed to get along, but something was missing? Oh, they did the work, but you could see they weren't working at their peak. For example, I worked with a vice presidency that needed to build communities of practice. Those are groups of staff and their clients who work together to share their knowledge together in order to do business better. It was hard for the staff to take time to do their work and also set up a community of practice and make sure that it kept on running. Yet problems of implementation and maintenance remained. In fact, if communities of practice could be developed successfully, the staff would actually benefit from the lessons of the other communities of practice because they were all about technology that had to work together. A staff member called me in to help, and together we designed a breakfast meeting of all the staff who should have been running communities of practice to solve problems. We asked each person there to talk about a challenging project where they were able to overcome the issues and simply get things done. The meeting lasted about 2 hours as each story took time to tell. There were so many moments when you could hear the others say something like, I didn't know you knew about that. And I didn't know you knew how to do that. I didn't know you did that. By the end of the session, links between the professional staff had been made. They had formed the beginnings of real relationships they could all depend on. The value of a community of practice became clear. By the end of that year, there were several successful communities of practice in operation, much to the benefit of the vice presidency and the organization as a whole. It came about because stories revealed insights into who each person was and what they brought to the table. By the way, Artem's Stories Without Borders is a game for people who want to build meaningful connections with those who happen to be nearby. It offers 1 page of clear instructions, followed by 10 pages of possible prompts to get the stories flowing. It's a wonderful guide. T.J. Elliott always brings more to the table than what you ask for. He joined me on Unlocked to talk about reinvention, show number 130. The former VP at Educational Testing Services, ETS, he decided in his retirement to return to his creative roots. He is now a playwright, producing plays off Broadway. On the show, he spoke about that reinvention in his life and much more. He is a deep thinker who draws from many sources. When I asked him for something he would offer to you for 2025, he spoke to why we must consider reinventing ourselves, not at the career level, but at the level of how we live our lives in general, where we have the opportunity to create at any moment. Listen carefully as he quotes from Seamus Heaney, the same poet I chose to begin today.
We should take the time and energy to create, even though the world has gotten chaotic and confusing, because that means that we're doing something that matters. Mary Oliver has this great quote: "Let me keep my mind on what matters, which is my work, which is mostly standing still and learning to be astonished." Even if there is all of this flux, all of these things that are disturbing around us, we can still be astonished. We still should be astonished. And then we must dare. Seamus Heaney, we must teach ourselves to walk on air against our better judgment. Go out there, keep walking on air, keep creating. That will make a difference.
In the 1980s, training in the new technologies that were now on people's desks needed to happen. It's hard to learn how to use software without actually using it. At that time, classrooms rarely had technology installed that would facilitate technology training. It was a real risk to create such a classroom without a ready model. Moreover, I knew creating that was outside my mandate, but I also knew that the training division was reluctant to try anything they weren't sure would work. I stepped out on the air. Being responsible for customer service, I asked my staff to design such a classroom. They came up with a design, I put it into a budget proposal, and I got the funding, even though it was the kind of proposal that should have come out of the training division. And yes, I got into a lot of trouble. But when it was complete, it was so successful that all such classrooms that the organization built used our design for the next 15 years. My whole being was about customer service. It was that strong sense of identity that allowed me to simply step out onto the air and, in the end, carried me through the trouble. Back to Seamus Heaney. I had never heard of this poet until quite recently. I came upon a line of his poetry that grabbed my attention, that inspired this show. Thanks to TJ, I saw that it was worth seeking more of Heaney's work, and as a result, I found a new source of inspiration for my own life. Inspiration that strengthens my resolve to step out onto the air. Speaking of stepping out onto air, Brian Murphy may not have stepped out onto air, but he did sail out onto the water to an island in the Chesapeake Bay off Maryland called Smith Island. That island has something called the Smith Island cake. Brian turned that amazing confection into a huge business that sends tens of thousands of cakes across the country every day. He talks about that story on his visit to Unlocked on the show called Surviving Business Mistakes, show number 137. Be sure to check out the show for some great stories. Knowing his story, I decided to order one of his cakes, and all I can say is that it was beautiful and incredibly delicious. A cake for special occasions, or just for the pleasure of eating something that is so good you don't want it to stop.
Hey Madeline, it's Brian Murphy. Hope you're well. It's Christmas Eve and I'm doing this video as I just departed from the gym with my son. He was going to the gym and I said, you know what? I heard a guy say recently, choose your heart. So I said, I was sitting there doing all this work, getting ready for the end of the year. And I said, you know what? Let's go to the gym. So I want to send this deliberately to you. First of all, this is a personal note. I'm grateful for you, your friendship this year, how you've had me think more deeply, more deliberately. I'm excited about your friendship and your mentorship for 2025. And I think what I would like to tell your audience is how grateful I am for you and your wisdom and how grateful they should be, whether you want to hear that or not. I think you're profoundly interesting. I think you're deliberate in everything you do. But I think that also your analytical brain in how it corresponds with English is very impressive, and I'm grateful for that. So I would like to tell your audience that. And the question I would like to ask your audience is, what did they do yesterday to prepare them for today? And what are they doing today to prepare them for tomorrow? So those are my thoughts. So Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. God love you, God bless you, and I look forward to talking to you soon. Bye.
Thank you, Brian. We often think that making a mistake leads to failure. The better result is that it leads to learning. I have interns in my business. I often talk about them. They are mostly in their teens or early 20s. They know some things very well, for example, the technology, or they're just fast readers. But they really don't know how to work as professionals. I consider a huge part of my job to be giving them work that stretches them just beyond their capabilities, but not so far that if they fail, my company is compromised. That means that I have to watch the first tasks I give them to see where they're really competent. Only then do I begin to push them. When they do fail, we just take it in stride, check what the lessons are, and instruct on how to do it right. It actually takes a little time for a manager to do this kind of work. But it's time at the beginning of their stay with you. It's much better spent that way. Because if you don't spend it in the beginning, you're going to be spending it every week after week after week. When it is time for them to go off and begin the next phase of their lives, my interns always remark at what they have learned while working with me. And my work runs smoothly. I started by telling you the story of my grandparents. I talked about their indomitable spirit, their intelligence, their curiosity, and the social support they gained from neighbors. Ed Hoffman talked about creating your own environment in which members can share what they actually think without fear of being excluded. To create this kind of working environment, members of the team must trust each other. Building that trust can begin with telling each other stories. I've watched so many teams change from combatants to supporters once they knew the stories of their fellow members. In a trusting situation, there is courage to be curious and learn deeply. Tom Garcia expands on what gives you strength to do and be who you are. Artem, Mushin-Makedonskiy, talked about storytelling that can build bridges across disagreements, making social connections easier to obtain and maintain. And from this, a new environment in which members can thrive because they are accepted, including the warts as well as the wisdom. TJ talked about walking on air, about being a creative person and using that to never stop creating, even when it feels there is nothing beneath your feet, but a strong sense of identity that buoys you up. Brian turned a historical cake into a 21st century business, walking on water instead of air. But the effect is similar. Enormous creativity, strong business, and deciding on new paths that show up. As I have listened again to the thoughts of Brian and the others, I am reminded of the missteps I've made along the way, the hopes that were dashed. There is even a sense of fatigue that can set in as I attempt to incorporate their advice into tomorrow. Then again, I do remember that I coach teenagers. They're at a time of serious transition in their lives. They are finishing up high school. They're deciding between more academics or trade school or stepping into the family business, marriage, military, taking a year off, staying at home. And on top of it all, they're facing adulthood, whatever that means to them. They're anxious times because these kinds of decisions can determine a lifetime. Which path should they try? If they make a decision, will they get the boarding pass they are hoping for? I ask you, would you really like to be facing such a decision point and do so without the wisdom you may have accumulated over the years? I get tired just thinking of it. Even my hope feels a little empty. Then again, I've made most of my decisions, even though I know the world still needs a great deal. And I remember that this kind of decision is faced in youth when your energy is high. I work with many people in transition, but when I work with young people, I become energized when I see them try for challenging things, because I know that same energy will help them face whatever comes at them. Just in case you may feel you just couldn't do it all, I would like to introduce Kathryn Murphy. Kathryn is a senior in high school who is in the process of applying to colleges. The future is ambiguous and uncertain, yet she had to take the next step. Watch and see the energy that will carry her through as she reaches toward the world that you and I may never reach.
All right, hello vlog. It is currently 7:01 on December 19th. What's my email address and password? I'm just logging into my portal right now. Just kind of like an assessment going in. What's my thing? I really don't care that much, but I'm still like the anticipation adrenaline has just hit me. So I'm about to open it. Just for like the visual sake, it just says status update. So just say a little prayer and just dive right in. I'm like, do I even want to press it? I'm really nervous. So, okay. What? What's my heart rate right now? Probably like 180, 100, like 50, 160. That's...
Has a bit of your hope been restored? I know that mine has. I belong to a leadership breakfast group that meets once a month, virtually since COVID. Among the members, there is a woman who always brings a different angle to the discussion, often with humor and always with energy. I want to interrupt this serious exploration and introduce Julia Loughran. Not because she's not serious, but because she remembers there is joy. Julia was on the show, number 104, called Unrecognized Women in Science. She introduced many unknown women of science who mastered both passion and persistence and won them remarkable places in history once their stories became known. In her own inimitable style, here is Julia's wish for all of us in 2025.
Hey, friends of Madeline Blair and friends of Unlocked. This is Julia Loughran, wishing you the happiest of holidays and the merriest of New Year's. And all I can say is life is profoundly good. So go take a big bite.
As you can see, there is nothing wrong with being positively cheerful. By now, you may be wondering what I would offer you for 2025. As a gift to you, here's the opening portion of my presentation to the International Conference on Stories Light Now. It is called Stories, Reality, and Quantum Physics. I'm Madeline Blair. I'll be talking about stories, reality, and quantum physics. Thanks for joining me. This morning I had a bowl of plain Greek yogurt and toasted muesli for breakfast. That's the opening sentence of a wonderful article written by Chris Ferry and published in Medium. The article itself is called Why is No One Taught the One Concept in Quantum Physics Which Denies Reality? His article explores the meaning of the context of an experiment. If he does an experiment in his lab, he questions whether having yogurt and muesli for breakfast might have influenced the experiment. And don't laugh. He then builds the case for the possibilities from the context of reality. In his article, he explains a theory is a set of mathematical rules that make predictions about outcomes, and those theories rule out most contexts by ignoring them. Economists will often say, it's assumed that. Quantum physics is an operational theory, he says, a manual set of instructions with expectations which allows modern technology, but it tells nothing about reality. Scientific realism believes that reality will slowly be revealed as we learn more and more. He then talks about contextuality, the name for the fact that any real states of the world depend on contexts that no experiment can distinguish. Moreover, context is real. We even feel different with just a change of an image of the context. Yes, it's worth reading his piece because he says more. I wanted to focus, however, on the reality and the value of shining light on context and reality. I'm going to skip to the end of his article, to the final paragraph. He says roughly, if the universe doesn't care what I had for breakfast, which is real, you must also give up reality. You may be inclined to believe that when you observe something in the world, you are passively looking at it just the way it would have been if you had not been there. He ends, quote, but quantum contextuality rules this out. There is no way to define a reality that is independent of the way we choose to look at it. This left me with excitement about the word context. Many years ago, I listened to a talk where John Seely Brown said that the smallest unit of knowledge is a story. Why is story the smallest unit? Because you can't tell a story without telling the context. It is part of the reality of the story. So now we can talk about story as a beam of light, illuminating something that scientists often ignore, and sometimes we do too, yet is essential to understanding the meaning of the story. Here's an example. If I were to say that the answer is 3, you might ask, what are you talking about? But if we were talking about American baseball, you would say, the answer is 3 strikes. But if we were talking about trying to get across a message and that how many points can you make, you would say, well, of course, the answer is 3 because everybody can keep 3 points in their mind. But if we were talking about cooking eggs, you would say, no, 3 minutes isn't enough. The egg will be runny. You see, the context really counts. In my own research, I learned of the powerful importance of knowing who you are in relation to being resilient. People who know themselves are more confident, more creative, more resilient, better communicators, even more competent. Getting to know who we are tends to help in discovering who they are. Getting to know who we are tends to take time and effort. When individuals come to me asking for help in discovering who they are, I always begin by suggesting that they start writing down stories from their lives. Stories from 5 minutes ago to stories from when they were 5. Fill journals with them till you stop one day and reading through them, you realize not just who you are, but how you actually got there, including the contexts in which you were formed. Paul Costello tells us, our stories form us as well as inform us. And the answer is yes. I have an enormous journal of stories filled with events and the context in which they occurred. And the more I wrote about the context of the story, the more was revealed. Let me give you an example. It was 6:30 in the morning and I had to get through security, set things up, make the remote connections to the global sites, and begin teaching promptly at 7. There was no margin in the time I had. I wasn't late, but I also couldn't saunter down that sidewalk to get to my classroom. I had to maintain my pace if it meant missing that uneven part on the sidewalk that tripped my foot, landing me face down on the sidewalk, giving me a concussion, and resulting in me spending 4 days in bed. When I said I had to get through security, set things up, make the remote connections to the global sites, and begin promptly at 7, what did you think? That's the context working on you. After I wrote the story, and as I explored the context, I could see some of the forces at work on me that makes me someone who works to be on time, not rushed, but on time. The context of the story made the story more interesting, but it also made it clearer to me something about myself. Having found myself face to face with the concrete, I was a bit stunned, but my commitment energized me to get up, dust myself off, and proceed as if, nothing had happened. That afternoon, when the class was over, I learned that I had given myself a concussion. I was told quite clearly that I had to go to bed, remain there until my head cleared. I was allowed to sleep, eat, and go to the bathroom. I could do nothing else. No TV, no books, no conversation. It took 4 days for my brain to clear. And when I got it clear, I realized why during the class I had difficulty finding words that I knew, but they just weren't there. The class must have thought I was terribly stupid. But one doesn't know one has a concussion at the time. But another thing happened which was quite remarkable. If I couldn't read and I couldn't watch television and I couldn't do anything that would be distracting, I thought. Just as Lindahl recommended, I reflected. I realized that what Viktor Frankl said many years ago was so true. He said that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space, we have the power to choose our response. I picture it as a sort of normal up and down as we go through life with a sudden event that makes us very uncomfortable. This is the time when we can choose to respond and select how we will move forward again. Because I had 4 days to reflect on it, that understanding was clear and deep and became part of the basis of my book, Unlocked. To me, resilience lies in that space. You choose how you respond to whatever hits you. It was with this understanding that I wrote my best-selling book, Unlocked: How to Embrace the Unexpected. When I think of story and its meaning and relationship to reality, I am overjoyed that we live in a universe where not everything is measurable, not everything is explorable. Yet as humans, we have a remarkable tool for exploring our lives to find meaning and shining light on the reality of our personal universe. It's the context that makes our lives real to us. Let's look at some contexts and how a resilient leader would tackle them, building on the wonderful thoughts of the contributors we've just heard. Here's a situation. Giving feedback to someone who needs to up their game. The person is suffering from burnout and does not recognize it. Tom Garcia's advice on clarifying identity is where they must start. They are more than what they are striving for, and they need to see that. Another situation of giving feedback, but this time to someone who is a high performer. One of your staff has learned the ropes well and performs well, actually well above her grade, but you can't give her a promotion yet. How do you keep her happy and feeling honored for her contributions? Ed Hoffman's "The System is Chicken." Keep that in mind. Give her opportunities to work with others on projects that will challenge her, and she can continue to learn, be exposed to deeper problems, and to others who will verify her capabilities and more when the time is right for promotion. Another setting, another situation. Perhaps it's goal setting for a newly formed team. The team has been given a mission to achieve in a very short period of time. you can see that the actions they're planning are not consistent with the mission. Artem's story sharing will help the team to see the different ways each sees the mission and how to bring it to a common understanding. I've used that in my own work with teams. We'll pick a word from the mission and have them tell a story inspired by that word. And it's amazing how suddenly the mission statement opens up. It just blossoms, and everyone sees why you did that and why you did that. And it comes together. Here's another situation when communication is not working. I would say consider TJ's thinking about being more and stepping out on the air to create. I mean, it takes courage to walk on without guaranteed support as you explore how your communication failed, and do it by asking what the listener heard in their own words. I promised you something important, and I would like to close today by quoting from Emma Sapela, psychologist and research scientist. She says the happiest people, who also happen to live the longest and healthiest lives, are the people who live in a life characterized by compassion, balanced with self-compassion. Here is what Dr. Sapela recommends. Notice times when people have helped you and offer them your appreciation. Consciously strike up conversations with strangers in the checkout lane. I've tried that one. It's amazing who you'll meet. Thirdly, she says, nurture friendships with coworkers. That means offering them appreciation when they do something to help you and striking up conversations maybe in the lunch line. Krista Rizzo, the author of You Can't Tell Me How to Feel, always ends our conversations with the question, what can I do to help you? This is Madeline Blair, wishing you deep joy and encompassing peace in this new year. What can I do to help you?